Beneath the marble monuments and carefully curated textbooks lies an America you were never taught. A nation built not just on ideals of freedom, but on secrets deliberately buried, voices systematically silenced, and truths rewritten by those who controlled the pen. What if everything you learned about the birth of this nation was incomplete? What if the heroes were more complicated, the villains more sympathetic, and the entire narrative a carefully constructed myth? July 4, 1776. The day America celebrates its independence. But the Declaration signed that day wasn't the radical document of equality we imagine. It was a compromise, one that deliberately omitted the nation's original sin. Thomas Jefferson's first draft contained a scathing condemnation of slavery. 27 lines blaming King George for the slave trade. But those words never made it to the final document. Southern delegates demanded their removal. The Founding Fathers chose unity over truth. Benjamin Franklin owned slaves until his final years. George Washington's teeth weren't wooden, they were extracted from enslaved people. These aren't minor footnotes. They're fundamental contradictions at the heart of American mythology. Before Plymouth Rock, before Jamestown, there were cities. Cahokia, near modern St. Louis, was larger than London in the 12th century. 20,000 inhabitants. Massive earthen pyramids. A sophisticated civilization that American textbooks reduced to a single paragraph, if mentioned at all. The erasure was systematic. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act. What followed was genocide, renamed with the sanitized phrase, the Trail of Tears. 16,000 Cherokee people forcibly marched 1,000 miles. 4,000 died. But here's what they don't teach you, the Cherokee had a written constitution. A bilingual newspaper. A higher literacy rate than the white settlers displacing them. They weren't savages refusing civilization. They were a democracy being destroyed by one. The Gilded Age. America's transformation into an industrial superpower. But gilded means covered in gold, concealing what lies beneath. March 25, 1911. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York City. 146 garment workers, mostly young immigrant women, burned alive or jumped to their deaths. The doors had been locked from the outside to prevent theft. To prevent bathroom breaks. To maximize productivity. But this wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was the inevitable result of a system where worker safety was considered bad for business. Where the Pinkertons, a private army, murdered striking coal miners. Where J.P. Morgan had more economic power than the federal government. The Ludlow Massacre. Colorado, 1914. National Guard and Rockefeller hired guns opened fire on striking miners' tent colony. 11 children and 2 women burned alive. John D. Rockefeller Jr. called it necessary defense of law and order. History calls him a philanthropist. American history teaches us about one civil war. But there were dozens of armed uprisings, rebellions against injustice that vanished from collective memory. The Battle of Blair Mountain, 1921. 10,000 coal miners in West Virginia fought a private army backed by the government. For 5 days, the largest armed uprising since the Civil War raged. 1 million rounds fired. The U.S. Army deployed bomber planes against American workers. It ended when federal troops arrived. The miners surrendered. And then something remarkable happened, the story was systematically erased. Textbooks don't mention it. Most Americans have never heard of it. A war on American soil, forgotten by design. Before Nazi Germany adopted eugenics, America perfected it. Between 1907 and 1963, over 60,000 Americans were forcibly sterilized. The disabled. The poor. Minorities. Anyone deemed unfit by pseudoscientific standards. The Supreme Court upheld the practice. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. That was 1927. The woman he condemned, Carrie Buck, wasn't mentally disabled. She'd been raped by her foster family. Institutionalized to hide their crime. Sterilized to hide the truth. California led the nation in forced sterilizations. 1/3 of all procedures. The Nazis studied California's program when designing their own. American eugenics wasn't a dark aberration. It was law, supported by universities, funded by Carnegie and Rockefeller foundations, celebrated as progress. December 7, 1941. A date which will live in infamy. Pearl Harbor brought America into World War II. But what if the surprise wasn't as surprising as we were told? The McCollum Memo. Written in October 1940, it outlined 8 steps to provoke Japan into an overt act of war. Every single action was implemented. American intelligence had broken Japanese codes months before the attack. They knew something was coming. This isn't conspiracy theory. These are declassified government documents. The question isn't whether leaders knew. It's why Pearl Harbor's 2,400 casualties were considered acceptable losses to end American isolationism. While Americans fought fascism abroad, the government imprisoned 120,000 of its own citizens at home. Their crime? Japanese ancestry. 2/3 were American-born. They lost homes, businesses, freedom. They were given a week to sell everything they owned. Executive Order 9066. Franklin Roosevelt signed it. The Supreme Court upheld it. But here's what makes it worse: American intelligence knew Japanese Americans posed no threat. Their own reports concluded there was no evidence of espionage or sabotage. The interment was based on racism, not security. And while Japanese Americans were imprisoned, the government recruited their sons to fight. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team became the most decorated unit in U.S. military history. They fought for a country that had caged their families. The irony was lost on those who sent them. Americans call it the Forgotten War. Korea, 1950 to 1953. But the deliberate amnesia conceals something darker than mere forgetting. The U.S. dropped 635,000 tons of bombs on Korea. That's more than the entire Pacific Theater in World War II. Napalm incinerated civilians. By war's end, almost every substantial building in North Korea had been destroyed. 20% of the population was dead. General Curtis LeMay, who orchestrated the bombing, later admitted, "We burned down every town in North Korea and some in South Korea too." This wasn't collateral damage. It was strategy. And when the armistice was signed, nothing had changed. The border returned to where it started. 3 million people died for a stalemate. The Gulf of Tonkin Incident. August 1964. North Vietnamese boats allegedly attacked American destroyers. Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, giving President Johnson unlimited war powers. 58,000 Americans died in the war that followed. The second attack never happened. President Johnson knew it. Defense Secretary McNamara knew it. The NSA's own historian later concluded, the parallels between the faulty intelligence on Tonkin Gulf and the manipulated intelligence used to justify the Iraq War are striking. They lied then. They lied again. The Pentagon Papers revealed what many suspected: the government had systematically lied about the war's progress, its purpose, its winnability. But the lie started earlier. They started with Tonkin Gulf. They started with the decision that American lives were expendable for Cold War posturing. November 22, 1963. 12:30 p.m. 3 shots. 1 president dead. 1 suspect arrested. Case closed by midnight. The Warren Commission concluded Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. 60 years later, 70% of Americans don't believe it. This isn't about conspiracy theories. It's about questions the official story can't answer. Why were Kennedy's autopsy photographs contradictory? Why was his brain missing from the National Archives? Why did the House Select Committee on Assassinations conclude in 1979 that there was probable conspiracy? We now know the CIA ran illegal domestic operations. That the FBI blackmailed Martin Luther King Jr., that the government proposed false flag attacks on American citizens to justify invading Cuba, Operation Northwoods, approved by Joint Chiefs, rejected by Kennedy months before his death. April 4, 1968. Memphis, Tennessee. Martin Luther King Jr. stepped onto a balcony. 1 bullet ended his life. James Earl Ray was convicted. But a 1999 civil trial reached a different conclusion: King was killed by a conspiracy involving government agencies. The FBI called King the most dangerous Negro in America. J. Edgar Hoover sent him anonymous letters urging suicide. The government surveilled him, infiltrated his organizations, actively worked to neutralize him, their word, from official documents. This isn't speculation. In 2014, the FBI acknowledged sending King the suicide letter. The Church Committee confirmed COINTELPRO's scope. Your government systematically worked to destroy the civil rights movement. And when surveillance and blackmail failed, leaders died. King. Malcolm X. Fred Hampton, shot in his bed by Chicago police in a raid coordinated with the FBI. September 11, 2001, changed everything. Or so we were told. The War on Terror began. 20 years. 7 countries. $4 trillion. 900,000 deaths. And what did America gain? Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Colin Powell showed satellite images to the UN. Definitive proof. Except there were no weapons. The intelligence was fabricated, exaggerated, or outright lies. Powell later called it a blot on his record. 500,000 Iraqis paid with their lives for that blot. The Downing Street memo revealed that by July 2002, the Bush administration had decided to invade Iraq. The intelligence was being fixed around the policy. They chose war, then manufactured the justification. Just like Tonkin Gulf. Just like the Maine in 1898. The pattern repeats because the consequences never come. In 2013, Edward Snowden revealed what many suspected: the government was collecting everyone's data. Every phone call. Every email. Every search. Not just terrorists. Everyone. The NSA called it PRISM. They tapped directly into the servers of Google, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft. They collected metadata on billions of communications. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court approved every single request, a court that operates in secret, with no opposition present. But mass surveillance didn't start in 2001. The Church Committee discovered it in the 1970s. Operation Shamrock intercepted telegrams. COINTELPRO infiltrated political groups. The technology changed. The violation of privacy remained constant. The 2008 financial crisis. $15 trillion in wealth vanished. 9 million Americans lost their homes. The largest economic disaster since the Great Depression. And almost no one went to jail. The banks that created the crisis received bailouts. Your tax dollars, given to the institutions that destroyed the economy. $700 billion initially. But the true cost, including Federal Reserve loans, $16 trillion. The largest wealth transfer from the public to private hands in history. And the fraud was blatant. Robo-signing foreclosure documents. Selling mortgages they knew would fail. Rating agencies giving AAA ratings to toxic assets for a fee. Everyone knew. Everyone profited. And when it collapsed, you paid for their mistakes while they collected bonuses. In 1977, Exxon's own scientists warned that burning fossil fuels would cause catastrophic climate change. The company buried the research. Then spent 40 years funding climate denial. This isn't a political debate. It's a documented cover-up. Exxon knew. Shell knew. They all knew. And they chose profit over the planet. They funded think tanks to sow doubt. They lobbied against regulation. They lied deliberately while the evidence grew. The tobacco playbook. Doubt is our product. Create confusion. Demand more research. Delay action. It worked for cigarettes. It worked for climate change. And now we're out of time to delay. Look at the pattern. From the founding to now. The powerful write history. The inconvenient truths disappear. The questions go unanswered. The cycles repeat. Slavery was erased from the Declaration. Genocide was renamed expansion. Labor uprisings were forgotten. Eugenics was buried. War crimes were justified. Assassinations were explained away. Financial fraud was rewarded. Climate science was denied. The information exists. The documents are real. The evidence is overwhelming. What's hidden isn't the facts. It's the willingness to confront them. To accept that the story you were taught was incomplete. That the heroes were flawed. That the system itself perpetuates the lies. George Santayana wrote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." But what if we were never taught the past to begin with? Income inequality matches the Gilded Age. Voting rights are under attack like Reconstruction. Surveillance exceeds anything Hoover imagined. Wars begin with lies, just like always. The climate crisis accelerates while corporations deny responsibility. The pattern repeats because we don't learn. And we don't learn because we weren't taught. The hidden history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding the present. It's about recognizing that the systems created centuries ago still shape our lives today. Every generation faces a choice. Accept the comfortable narrative or confront the difficult truth. Pass on the myths or demand the full story. Texas controls textbook content for much of America. In 2010, the State Board of Education voted to minimize slavery's role, downplay the civil rights movement, and promote American exceptionalism over critical analysis. This isn't education. It's indoctrination. But truth has a way of emerging. The internet makes suppression harder. Declassified documents become public. Journalists investigate. Historians revise. The gap between the official story and the evidence grows too wide to ignore. Behind every hidden history is a human being. The seamstress who died because a door was locked. The child torn from ancestral land. The teenager sterilized by the state. The soldier who died for a lie. Their names were erased. Their stories buried. But they lived. They loved. They suffered. They deserve to be remembered not as statistics in a hidden chapter, but as people whose lives mattered. Whose truth matters. This is why hidden history must be exposed. Not to shame or blame the present for the past. But to honor those who were silenced. To learn from what was done. To choose differently going forward. America is not its myths. It's not the sanitized version taught in schools. It's messier, darker, more complicated. And more resilient than the simple stories suggest. The true patriotism isn't blind loyalty to a narrative. It's the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. To acknowledge that the nation built on freedom was also built on slavery. That the land of opportunity displaced its original inhabitants. That the government of the people has repeatedly betrayed them. And then to ask, knowing all this, what kind of country do we want to become? The hidden history reveals not just what was done, but what's possible. Labor movements won worker rights. Civil rights activists defeated segregation. Investigative journalists exposed corruption. Change happens when people refuse to accept the lie. The hidden history of America isn't finished. Right now, today, decisions are being made about what will be remembered and what will be forgotten. Documents are being classified. Stories are being suppressed. Narratives are being shaped. But you know now what to look for. The gaps in the story. The questions left unanswered. The voices deliberately silenced. You know that official history and actual history aren't always the same. That power writes the narrative. That truth requires digging. Every document declassified, every truth exposed, every silence broken is a victory against forgetting. The hidden history of America is being written right now. The question is, will you be someone who hides it, or someone who exposes it? The monuments will stand. The textbooks will simplify. The myths will persist. But now you know to look beneath the surface. Because the most dangerous thing in a democracy isn't the hidden truth. It's the citizens who stop searching for it. Remember them. Remember all of them. The story continues. The search never ends. The truth is worth finding.